Let me just say, welcome to Greening USA's October Green Bag Lunch. We appreciate all of you being here today. As most of you know, or if you don't know, Greening USA is not-for-profit 501c3 organization promoting sustainability in Central New York for the past about 22 years or so. We are a volunteer organization, and your support with dues, donations, or volunteering is helpful to help with carrying out our mission and our programs. I usually like to begin green bag lunch with a brief going around the room so people can introduce themselves, just their name and what organization they may be affiliated with. It's helpful to our speakers, and it also helps us to build community. So I'm going to just, I should probably say myself, for those of you that don't know me, my name is John Prespior. I've been I was a founding member of Grinning USA way back in the day. By training, I'm an engineer, and I'm currently serving as president of the board of Greening USA. I'm going to just pass it over to Scott, and I will point out each person so we can hear who you are and who you're with. Scott?
Hi, my name is Scott Kushner. I'm a retired librarian in the Syracuse area. I'm also on the board of Green USA, treasurer, and also running the show. Greetings.
As the host of the Zoom.
Yes.
Thank you, Scott. John Monahan.
Hi everyone, I'm John Monaghan, independent consultant, and I work with WEACT on outreach for their environmental justice fighting law and cumulative impacts work across upstate New York. I'm based in Rochester, recently moved there, formerly from Utica. Thanks all for being here.
Roseanne, I guess it is. Unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Hi, folks. My name is Roseanne Lorifus. I'm a retired foreign language teacher. I am on the board of CCAA, Climate Change Awareness and Action.
Thanks for being here. Barry Gordon.
Hi, I'm a member of CNY Solidarity Coalition. I have an academic background in environmental issues, but my work has been very different from that. I view this as an environmental and moral travesty, and we can go from there.
Thank you for being here. Dick? Unmute.
Hi, my name is Dick Kornbluth. I'm on the coordinating committee of the CNY Solidarity Coalition. I'm also president of the board of Urban Jobs Task Force of Syracuse. I'm a retired home performance contractor. Spent my total professional life fixing existing houses, fixing the energy systems of existing houses. So I am president of the board of Urban Jobs Task Force of Syracuse, and I am also involved with the Sustain CNY Coalition.
Thank you, Dick. Michelle?
Hello, my name is Michelle Beltran. I'm the director of a continuing education program at the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health. We're actually based at UC Berkeley, but I was born and raised in Baldwinsville, just outside of Syracuse.
Well, thanks for being here from the other side of the country. Richard Smartin?
Hello, everybody. Rick Smartin, long retired professor at SUNY ESF. Also been on the board for Central New York Land Trust for some 35 years. and hang on to these presentations whenever I can. And hello, Berkeley. I'm a graduate of University of California, Berkeley.
I'm a graduate of ESF, so
Small world. Peter King.
Good afternoon. I'm a Syracuse resident. I'm a member of Urban Jobs Task Force and Moving People Transportation Coalition. I was participating in the Micron comments this summer, which was a lot of reading. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And Nora?
Hi, I'm an Ithaca College senior. I'm sorry, I'm in the car, but I'm an Ithaca College senior. I'm just observing to take notes for a social movement project. I'm I live in Syracuse, so I thought this would be perfect to observe to kind of take notes and kind of see what's going on within my city as far as Micron and the environment.
Thanks, Nora, for being here. Drive safely.
Thank you.
Kaylee, I see is new, just joined on, I think. Going to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Okay, so I think everybody has introduced themselves now. So let's get on with our program, which is, as all of you know or should know, New York's new environmental justice citing law is the topic, and the subcategory of how does Micron fit in with this. Our two speakers today are Brianna Carabal. And I should have asked Brianna how to pronounce her last name. I'm sorry I didn't do that before. You'll have to correct us. And Donald Hughes. Brianna is the state legislative manager at We Act for Environmental Justice, and is responsible for working directly with state legislators and agencies to build programs and policies that advance environmental justice for the Northern Manhattan community and other environmental justice communities across New York. Prior to joining We Act, Brianna worked for Friends of the Earth in Washington, D.C. to keep false climate mitigation solutions out of federal policy priorities. Brianna holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science and geography and environmental studies from UCLA, and a master's degree in climate science and policy from the Columbia Climate School, with a focus on environmental law and community-based solutions to climate change. Brianna will be our first speaker, and then she will be followed by Don Hughes, who has been active in the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter since 2007, serving in various roles. As an activist, he fought the construction of a trash incinerator in Syracuse and has worked to promote the cleanup of Onondaga Lake, among other things. He holds degrees as Master in Environmental Engineering and a doctorate in Environmental Chemistry. And he has been Central New York's most ardent advocate for the control and elimination of PFAS from the environment. And many of you know Don has been a somewhat frequent speaker at Greenbag Lunch, as we've featured programs related to Micron. Don serves as conservation chair of the Central and Northern New York group of the Sierra Club. He serves as that group's representative to the Sustain Central New York Sustainability Coalition, where he chairs the Micron DEIS work group. So,
John, a couple corrections. I'm not the conservation chair. That was taken over by Peter Plumley this year. So I'm
well,
focused on Micron.
Okay, well, thank you for that, because I wouldn't want to take anything away from Peter. But yes, and our speakers, you certainly can correct anything that I've said and expand on your background as necessary, so that we understand not only what you are doing, but about your organizations that you represent. And I'll also say, before I turn it over to Brianna, please, everyone, keep your mics muted unless you're called upon. Questions and comments can be put in the chat. We will try to pay attention to those, but we expect not to get to questions and comments until after both of our speakers have completed their formal remarks. And I think that's all the housekeeping things I need to say. Brianna, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, John. And if anyone was wondering how to pronounce my last name, it's Carbajal. So I will go ahead and start my presentation. All right. As John mentioned, hello to the UC graduates. I'm also a UC graduate from the University of California, Los Angeles. I'm actually originally from Los Angeles. I moved to New York City about 4 years ago. And since then, I've been working with WeAct, doing all the things John mentioned, working on building policies and programs that would benefit low-income communities, communities of color, and protections against environmental burdens and pollution burdens. So one of the main ways we are doing that, and one of the things I have been working on throughout my time at WeAct, has been the passage and implementation of the environmental justice citing law, which I'm excited to get into today. And I'm also glad that we have a good amount of academics on the call. My presentation today is actually in more or less an academic format, so I'm glad that this will probably resonate. Some history of the environmental justice citing law. We act along with South Bronx Unite, based in the South Bronx. We were working together to co-lead the campaign to pass what was titled the Cumulative Impacts Law back in 2022. This law is only the second in the nation, behind New Jersey, to pass permitting reform that requires facilities to document their impacts on disadvantaged communities, and requires that the state deny permits if facilities are increasing pollution burden. That's important because there are quite a number of states that have looked into passing cumulative impacts policies that don't have that piece of enforcement with denials of permits. So only New Jersey and New York State have so far been able to achieve that aspect of cumulative impacts policy. This law was enacted, so it is in effect as of December 31st, 2024. However, regulations to implement and enforce the law are currently being drafted. For anyone new to how the process works, essentially what that means is we have a law, it's in effect, but for the rules for how industry is to comply with it are still being written. So that's what that means about regulations being drafted. Also, for a quick overview of what the law itself is and what it is we're talking about today. Previously, before this law, New York State permitting was done looking at an industry on a case-by-case basis, only examining what is the pollution that's to be emitted from the facility in question in front of DEC or another agency that needs to approve the permit. But the pollution from other sources already existing in the community was never taken into consideration on whether or not that permit should be approved in their decision making before. So what this law intends to do is broaden the scope by incorporating the full picture of what other sources of pollution, along with economic and social factors, would result in a more equitable decision-making process for where to site polluting facilities. And we were pursuing this to correct the long-standing environmental disparities faced by communities of color and low-income neighborhoods. So top line, what does the law do? It mainly does three things, but it also does a bunch else. But the main three things that it does is, like I mentioned, this is only the second of the times in the US in which a policy is explicitly told DEC to deny a permit and other agencies to deny a permit if it's increasing pollution in a community. So what it would do is for new projects, essentially any facility looking to site in a disadvantaged community, DEC will determine if, and sorry, DEC is the Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm going to try to avoid acronyms. DEC will determine if that project will cause or contribute more than a de minimis amount of pollution to the disadvantaged community. We'll get into a little bit what de minimis means later, but just for the bare minimum definition, basically we're interpreting that to mean like the bare minimum, any amount of pollution to the disadvantaged community. But for existing facilities, a permit shall not be issued if it would significantly increase the disproportionate pollution burden in disadvantaged community. So there are two standards. There's a standard for denial if it's a new project, and there's a standard for denial if it's an existing project on whether that permit will be approved or renewed. For new projects, just to sum it up, that standard is lower if it's going to increase by a de minimis amount. And for renewal projects, that standard is a little higher on whether it will significantly increase pollution. Those definitions have yet to be defined. Those definitions are what we are looking to define in the rulemaking process. 2, it directs DEC to require permit applicants to prepare an existing burden report for a new project or applicable permit modification or renewal of a permit. So essentially, all facilities that are captured by this law, if they're looking to site somewhere new for the first time near a disadvantaged community, have a major permit modification near a disadvantaged community and are captured by the law, or are renewal near a disadvantaged community and are captured by the law, should be producing existing burden reports as what this law intends. And again, what the existing burden report should include, we will get into that in a little bit later, but that is also to be decided in the rulemaking process. 3, what else the law does is directs DEC to require actions for a facility to implement appropriate operational changes that would reduce the pollution burden on disadvantaged community. So not only does DEC get the ability to approve or deny projects based on this law, but they also explicitly lays out their duty to implement operational changes. So for instance, if there's been a polluting facility in the community for a long time, it will provide a conditional approval for a permit based on if they change XYZ things in terms of mitigating their pollution burden. Overall, what we as advocates want this law to do is not continue to allow the pattern of overburdening a community to where it's full of hundreds of polluting facilities in a small area. And we also want for the facilities that have been operating in residential areas near communities of color, low-income communities for a long time, for those facilities to be lowering the pollution burden that they have been putting out into the community. So this is, I mentioned New Jersey and New York as some of the strongest cumulative impacts policies across the United States, but we are definitely not the first. nor are we going to be the last in terms of states to pursue such policies. We are, in terms of this timeline, I believe California was one of the first states in 2015 to want to look into the cumulative effects of pollution on a community and pass legislation regarding, I think it was mainly guidance for how facilities can reduce pollution burden. And then New Jersey passed their strong law in 2020, followed by Colorado, Vermont, and then we're seeing now across states a wave of folks that have followed suit. So how exactly does this work? The environmental justice citing law particularly looks at different types of facilities that it captures, the types of facilities that are included in the EJ citing law we'll get into. But when looking at the types of actions, it's captured by a couple of different processes. So for the EJ citing law, it changed the way we currently have two existing processes at the New York State level, and applied modifications to them to be more equitable, or improve the outcome in decision making for communities of color, low income communities. So what exactly it changed? It impacted the way that the New York State secret process operates and how the Uniform Procedures Act operates. I won't exactly get into this, but I wanted to provide this as a resource in case anyone wants to get into the nitty-gritty of it. But essentially, type 1 and enlisted enlisted actions will go through the secret process. Type 2 actions will go through the Uniform Procedure Act process, and those result in permit decisions. How exactly it changes it and what exactly it means. SECRA, what DEC did overall, this rulemaking, was once the law passed and was signed into law in early 2023, we were waiting for the regs to come out for a while. They released the first wave of regulations when it comes to how the environmental justice citing law will change or modify the secret process. The comments and rulemaking for that closed in May 7th of this year. And what we are focusing on now is the changes to UPA and the burden report, which is how DEC will particularly be making decisions about what they will be allowing or not allowing a facility to be approved. So I will not address SECRA right now because that's something that we're past that in the process. What is coming up in the rulemaking is more, what are the changes to how DEC will be making permit decisions. And so if I mentioned this a little bit, but the blue portion of the screen is going a little bit deeper in a flowchart version of what I explained in the beginning of how this all works. And I want to particularly point out this portion here in the dotted light blue. And that is one loophole of this law. It says for permit renewals or modifications, particularly, the existing burden report can be waived if the permit would serve an essential environmental, health, or safety need for the disadvantaged community, for which there is no reasonable alternative. Now, what is defined as an essential environmental, health, or safety need of the disadvantaged community, again, is to be decided in phase 2 of the rulemaking process. So a lot of the portions that are highlighted in this flowchart, let me go actually back, are kind of what is to be decided or fully fleshed out in the rulemaking process. So that's why the rulemaking process is so important, is even though we passed this piece of legislation and we had an intention of what the law is meant to do and how it's supposed to work, there are many definitions and some exceptions in which this law could potentially be weakened. And that's why it's important that we are at the table as advocates in every step of the process to make sure that DEC is implementing it as we are intending for it to be used. So what exact facilities are we talking about here? We're really talking about large sources and activities that may cause pollution. The cumulative impacts law, or EJ siting law, is not as concerned with smaller facilities. We were really wanting to make sure the largest, baddest actors were being captured. And so what does that mean? It means projects seeking permits for water pollution or speedies permits, air pollution or Title V permits, liquefied natural and petroleum gas, solid and hazardous waste management facilities are more or less the permits that are captured by this law that are subject to the new ways in which DEC will be making these permits decisions. And some examples of that are the pictures that I have on the screen. This is like the Brookhaven landfill. A community group that is active in fighting this landfill also has given a talk on this law and how it could be used in their area to capture this facility and reduce its emissions and pollution in the community. And the Con Ed LNG plant in Astoria, an example of an LNG facility that will likely be captured by this law. So I mentioned that rulemaking and phase 2 that are coming up are really important. I hinted at some of the decision-making processes that will have to be hashed out in phase 2. This goes a little bit more in depth, particularly about the existing burden report. Because what is it? So the existing burden report is required for new permits. It can be waived, like I mentioned, for permit renewals or modifications under that particular exception. What does it look like in New Jersey? It makes the facility include an analysis of what are existing environmental and public health stressors. Are there adverse stressors? Are there stressors associated with a facility? Can that a facility avoid causing a disproportionate impact? More or less, what are the mitigation measures it can apply to its pollution burden? And how the facility, how does it conserve a compelling public interest? Kind of like the essential environmental health safety need like we have in New York. There is also in New Jersey a similar loophole about compelling public interest, but they have stressed, the advocates in New Jersey have stressed that compelling public interest cannot include economic benefits, such as the facility promising new jobs in the community, because from an environmental justice perspective, we don't support the potential trade-off of new jobs coming to the area in promise of as a promise of the facility, even though they would still be allowed to pollute. Like it's not a trade-off, and neither has it really been one that we've seen been promised as they say it would be. In New Jersey, the advocates have said that even though sometimes the facilities have promised that they would come and revitalize the community with jobs, we oftentimes don't see that's the case with them hiring from the local community anyway. So they were very strong in having the public voice that as a concern for that not being a loophole is the promise of jobs in terms of getting permits approved. Other things that are to be defined in rulemaking, like I mentioned, what is de minimis, what is significant increase, In New Jersey, they say that the department shall deny a permit for a new facility, finding that the approval of the permit would cause or contribute to adverse public health stressors in the overburdened community. And this is important because we also have the cause or contribute to language in New York. And I think we'll see that when Don gets into his presentation, is what exactly does cause or contribute to mean? Kind of what is the radius of impact that DEC might be looking at? We know in terms of the law that it is citing within a disadvantaged community, but exactly what is that distance of what is a disadvantaged community? Is it 1 mile away, 2 miles away, 5 miles away? I think that also is to be decided within the rulemaking process. Okay, so where are we and what are the next steps? Like I mentioned, there was a phase 1 public comment process with regards to how the environmental justice citing law will change how the seeker process has traditionally been applied to permitting decisions. And that comment period closed in May 7th of 2025. We haven't seen the final rules of that phase 1 yet. They have not been released by DEC. We heard potentially this fall we might see them, but I'm not entirely sure. Timeline for phase 2 rulemaking, again, having to do with defining terms and defining processes for how the UPA will work, in addition to particularly how DEC will be making permitting decisions now in accordance with this law, have not been announced. So we have no clue what timeline DEC is thinking about announcing phase 2 regulations. I checked that QR code earlier. These slides were created a while ago. That QR code is no longer active, but there is a DEC website that you might be able to go to monitor when phase 2 is being released. It probably is the same site they released phase 1 on. But either way, we as We Act will be letting everyone know when phase 2 is released, so you can have a chance to take a look at what they're thinking. And then I also wanted to share this slide. Recently, DEC held a stakeholder engagement session that was not open to the entire public, but they shared these discussion questions of what they're thinking in regards to phase 2. I won't go through all of them, but if you are so interested or inclined in reviewing them, we talked through some of them. And these are more or less the types of questions that you can expect they will address in their phase 2 proposed rules. All right, so now I'm gonna move on to our call to action. Exactly what will we as We Act be doing in this process? Well, it starts with having these conversations with you all. We want to make sure that the public is aware and engaged of this law and how it can help communities fight pollution in their regions. And we want to make sure that communities are aware of the process to be engaged, because like I mentioned, we have an intention in the way we pass this law and the way we want this law to be carried out. But whether or not that intention is followed is up to us to make sure we are continuing to put public pressure and paying very close attention to what DEC is doing, because it's not just us as advocates that they're being beholden to. They also have to take into account what the governor's office wants and what industry wants. And so we need to be applying public pressure to make sure that our stories are being told, that they are getting as much data and information that we can provide them from our regions across the state, and our concerns, what facilities we are fighting in our areas, so that they have all the information they could take into account when making final decisions, final rules for how this law will be followed. So not only am I encouraging community members to get involved, I also would like to put the call to action that if you have a close relationship with a legislator or an elected official that could potentially weigh in on this law as well, that would also go a long way in terms of putting public pressure for DEC to be closely following the intent of this law. And so when phase 2 regulations are released, again, we don't have a timeline. I am going to guess sometime in December, maybe sometime in January, we will see that. Then we, as WEAC, will be providing public comment templates for environmental groups to submit their own comments. Basically, we'll take out kind of what are the main things that we want folks to be kind of beating the drum about when it comes to phase 2 regulations. And we'll put out that comment template for you all to copy and put on your own letterhead and add or change things that you all want to change. And then also submit that in the document. Oh, sorry, someone scared me. I think you mute yourself, please.
Abdul, can you mute yourself?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're also going to be doing invites to trainings that we'll be hosting for how to speak at public hearings if it's your first time getting involved with a hearing like this. We don't expect you to know the process right away and what to expect and what it looks like or how. So we'll be outlining that as much as possible to give you a template for how you can speak at a public hearing. What happened with phase 1 was DEC held virtual and in-person public hearings across the state, but they weren't frequent. I think it was like one in like a couple of different regions in the state. So it's important that we're getting as many people out to these opportunities as possible. In New Jersey, something that they did that was really strong was they had a public hearing with over 300 folks in attendance, more or less saying the same thing, so that their agency really heard them when it came to what the public was wanting and knowing that the public cared about this law. So that is more or less our goal, is to do something similar here in New York State when the hearing opens again. We're also going to be providing an easier lift, one-click action network tool for community members to submit letters. We'll have like a pre-written comment that of course they can edit, but it'll mainly be like they can write their name in and kind of sign a petition or sign on to what we suggest that the community should be weighing in on when it comes to phase 2. We'll also be putting together a sign-on letter for legislators. They're very busy and sometimes they don't have the ability to write their own, though writing their own would be really strong. But if that's the case, we want to make sure they're still captured in a way. And so we'll have an option for legislators to do a sign on as well. All right, I think that is my time. So I will stop here. And I believe I am passing the mic to Dawn, who is going to tell us about Micron and its particular impacts to the community.
Okie dokie. Does anyone have any burning questions they want to ask Brianna now before I get started on talking about Micron? All right, I'll take that as a no, and I'm going to share my my talk. And I know some of you have seen some of this before, but but it's been updated. So can you see my screen okay? Somebody give me a heads up.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I've tailored this to talking about trying to reference the Micron impacts to environmental justice communities. And I'm trying to get this to go. There we go. So just a little perspective on Micron, especially for those of you who are new to the subject. Micron is a semiconductor manufacturer based in Boise, Idaho. Their thing is memory chips, and they're proposing to build the largest industrial development in New York State history, just outside of Syracuse, New York. And the reason that they're ending up here is severalfold. One is that the local government, Onondaga County, and in particular, Ryan McMahon, who's the current executive, created a large, what they call a commerce park in the northern suburbs. And it's perfectly situated for industrial development in the sense that it has access to water, lots of electricity. There's a rail line that goes nearby. It's near the interstate. So from that perspective, it's very good. From the perspective of ecology, it's terrible because it's full of wetlands and endangered species of bats. Another big reason is funding. So the CHIPS and Science Act, which passed when Biden was in office in 2022, provides a lot of money to what they call reshore. In other words, bring back the semiconductor manufacturing industry back to the United States. And New York State is throwing some additional funding. This is the scene from December. I don't think that actually, I don't think that that date is correct. But Micron, when they announced that they were coming to New York and they secured the funding, you're seeing the governor on the left and Sanjay. What's his last name? Someone help me with this. Sanjay, is it Gupta? Anyway, he's the CEO of Micron, and there's Chuck Schumer on the right. So the timeline for this project now looks like this. The draft environmental impact statement was released this past June. Lots of us got together and produced a lot of comments, or over 1,600 comments, some of which went into great depth. I worked with the Sierra Club, which sent in about 35 pages. Jobs to Move America, 100 pages, and so forth. They're analyzing those comments now. The final EIS is due. It's been pushed back to probably mid-November. And they are talking about possibly breaking ground the end of December, or more likely January. This really is a two-phase project. There's Fabs 1 and 2. And expectation is that the first one, the fab, is for fabrication facility, that it will be operating by 2031. And the second one will be under construction. All the utilities will be in place. And then 10 years after that, everything's going to be, all four of these manufacturing facilities will have been constructed. So we're looking at 16 years worth of construction. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, this is a shot of the facility being built in Boise, Idaho. This was taken last year. And what it entails is clear and excavate the site. In the case of the place in Clay. This involves removal of hundreds of acres of trees and excavating wetlands, and then they bring in lots of hard fill. This is all going to be brought in by train. They have to pour literally hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of concrete and steel to support the buildings. And then there's all the other infrastructure, tanks and parking and so forth. And then outfit the buildings with very expensive machinery. This is got lots of public money going into it, about $23 billion altogether, and this is just for the first two fabs. So there's grants from the CHIPS Act, there's income tax credits that are federal that were recently increased, and there's New York State is throwing in over $2 billion of tax credits, and there's also local support from the county. The state is giving discounted utility rates to Micron, and the county is also footing the bill for infrastructure like a new water line and an advanced wastewater treatment facility. The size of this thing is truly enormous. The whole thing is going to be about 1.5 miles long and up to 1 mile wide. These are the 4 fabs, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And you see all these statistics here, just to say it's really, really big. These buildings stand over 100 feet tall. I think 150 feet is the number I saw. So let's get down to what is it that Micron does, or any semiconductor manufacturer. Well, they bring in silicon wafers, they purchase those. They purchase lots and lots of chemicals. They bring in a lot of water, and they power this whole thing with a lot of electricity. All that is used through a very complex process to produce these finished chips. Obviously, that's their moneymaker. But along with this comes a lot of wastewater that needs to be treated. There's air emissions that need to be treated, and even after treatment, you have emissions. There's solid waste, there's chemical waste, and there's a lot of excess heat. To give you an idea of the input side, it's between, and this is my estimate based on research, 100 to 200 tons of chemicals every day of the year brought in by truck. The water usage is going to span between 20 and 50 million gallons a day. This, for comparison, the city of Syracuse uses about 45 million gallons a day. And the electrical usage for this facility is ginormous. Just to put it in perspective, the Micron facility, if it's completely built, will increase the electric demand for the entire state by 11%. So it will be 1/9, 1 out of every 9 electrons in the New York City, in the New York State. This is upstate, downstate, Long Island, New York City. 1 out of 9 electrons will be going into the Micron plant. So chemicals, lots of chemicals. I'm a chemist, so this is of great concern to me. There's just there's literally hundreds of chemicals, most in the form of liquids, but many are also gases. And the things that are of greatest concern are the heavy metals because they're toxic, mercury, cadmium. And there's a lot of focus on these guys, the perfluorinated alkyl substances, or PFAS, and their cousins, the perfluorinated compounds. These are highly toxic and highly resistant to breakdown. They accumulate in the environment, and if you test your blood, you will find PFAS in it. Everybody is carrying a burden of PFAS now due to the last 70 or so years that these things have been manufactured and distributed. And we got a whole host of other things. I'll just call your attention to this last item down here. The semiconductor industry uses some extremely hazardous substances. One is arsine, and the other is phosphine. These are gases that if you breathe even small quantities, you will die. So they have to be handled with great caution. PFAS. Everybody's talking about PFAS. What is the problems with PFAS? Well, a lot of health effects have been tied to PFAS. So there's various cancers. Kidney cancer and testicular cancer have been closely associated with PFAS, possibly breast cancer as well. There are strong evidence of liver damage and thyroid disease and several other ill effects are associated with PFAS. And in addition, PFAS cause adverse effects on unborn children, including lower birth weight and delayed development of mammary glands and reduced sperm count in unborn children. A lot of this information actually comes from human data, which is unusual. There's a movie called Dark Waters that documents a facility in West Virginia owned and operated by DuPont. They ended up doing a large health study. So here's the Micron facility to be built. Here's Syracuse down here, and this is Clay, New York. Let me explain some of there's quite a bit of detail on this slide. First of all, the facility is going to be fed with water coming from Lake Ontario. That's the water pipeline here. There's electricity that's coming through the grid, but a lot of it comes from the nuclear reactors that are up here by Oswego. And what is shown here is what Brianna was talking about, disadvantaged communities. These are been mapped out by New York State. And as you can see, there's none within a 5-mile radius. And that's what the environmental impact statement says. Well, the closest one's 5 miles away. And so we're not going to have much of an impact on them. So, is that true? Well, maybe, maybe not. They have not included what they've identified on the map, low-income communities, minority communities, but those are not been identified as disadvantaged communities. And I don't know how that criteria was arrived at. But my point here is that this is a pretty arbitrary distance. So let's delve into what are potential impacts on disadvantaged communities. And I'm going to divvy this up into two categories. One is local, and that means within the 5-county area or near to the plant. And you've got all these possible effects from water and air pollution, from traffic, and economic effects. But we need to also think about distant communities because materials from Micron, especially waste materials, are going to be sent off to distant communities, even in different states, and can cause impacts there. So first, let's turn our attention to water. So the water, the treated wastewater from the facility is going to be handled by the county, a county sewage treatment plant called Oak Orchard. They're going to build a special facility here, and that will discharge into the Oneida River, which then flows into the Oswego River. Let me get my cursor here, which ends up flowing into Lake Ontario. So pollutants, and we're particularly interested in worried about PFAS, which don't break down, will end up in Lake Ontario, which is where we happen to be drinking or drawing drinking water from. So there's an impact. Lake Ontario already has got PFAS in it from other applications. You can see the numbers here. These are the two most tested for PFAS. These are legacy compounds now, no longer used by the semiconductor industry. But you can see that we are approaching what has been proposed by EPA under Biden and actually surprisingly retained under the Trump administration, 4 parts per trillion. And the other aspect of this is that fish accumulate PFAS, and New York State is starting to issue advisories, consumption advisories for fish based on PFAS. This is a fairly new thing. They've been issuing fish advisories based on mercury and PCBs and some other substances. PFAS is new, and I expect this to get to expand as they do more testing. And as you know, poor people tend to rely more on wild caught fish. It's also a traditional source of subsistence for Native Americans and certain immigrant communities. Let's switch to air pollution. So there's a whole host of air pollutants that's going to be coming out of this facility, and I would expect that the major impacts are going to be located within the vicinity of the plant. And there are no EJ communities right in this area, so I don't expect air pollution to affect EJ communities from the plant emissions. However, there's going to be a lot of traffic generated, and that traffic is going to be on the interstates and all through the area. Keep in mind, they're going to be delivering hundreds of tons of chemicals a day to this facility. That's going to generate a lot of traffic. So there is an impact related to that. And then there's the other issue that people have raised is what about spills? Because inevitably there are spills. And that can impact anybody where it happens. And this is a laundry list of the truck traffic. I mentioned the chemical deliveries, but there's also municipal solid waste. There's materials that are destined to be recycled. There's wastewater sludge. There's hazardous waste. All this stuff is moving on the highway. And then, of course, they're shipping out their product, and I assume that's going out by highway as well. All right, another issue of that I'm particularly concerned about with Micron is this treatment that they're doing for these PFCs, perfluorinated chemicals. They're going to incinerate them, and that's going to lead to some particularly hazardous air emissions, because when you incinerate this fluorinated stuff, these things are designed not to burn, not to break down. And so the incineration process is not completely effective. And so some of this stuff is only partly broken down, even after you scrub it. And this does produce wastewater that has PFAS in it, which then has to be treated. So this is a particularly hazardous form of pollution that comes out of their stacks. I want to mention that, and this relates to the disposal of hazardous waste. So they're going to be sending hazardous waste to distant communities, and it's going to get, a lot of it will get burned. And here's an example right in New York State, in Cohoes, which is north of Albany. This plant called, a company called Norlight was operating a facility. It since has been shuttered. They took in PFAS containing material, firefighting foam, and burned it, or at least they put it into their kilns, but a lot of it got emitted from the stacks and settled in this low-income community, which is right next to the plant. And these folks were also being impacted by lots of dust from the piles of material aggregate that they were making. It was a real mess. But here's a clear example of an incineration, a waste disposal facility. So they were taking in hazardous waste and burning it, and they got an exemption. A loophole in the law allows this, and then it was impacting the neighbors right next door. It took the New York State legislature to actually cause this plant to close. Its DEC was resisting it. All right, let's just talk about waste disposal, because this is going to affect the communities that are receiving the waste. So we'll start with just regular commercial solid waste, which is non-hazardous, but there's quite a bit of it, and some of it will be recycled. Some of it will, probably most of it will end up at our local trash incinerator. And if they generate more than that can handle, it will go off to landfills somewhere. Then you've got wastewater sludges. The Micron is going to have a wastewater pretreatment facility, and I estimated this amount of tons per year coming out of there. Where's that going to go? They say they're going to recycle it. I don't know what that means. They haven't explained what that means. One of my comments. What do you mean by this? I hope they don't mean spreading it on agricultural land, but probably most of it will go into landfills. And the county-owned facility, I don't know how much sludge they're going to generate, but that's going into a landfill. And then finally, we have hazardous waste. And as you saw with the Norlight facility, what they do is this so-called fuel blending, and it gets burned, or it goes directly into incinerators to be burned, or it may be recovered using distillation. That's used for solvents. But again, all these things are not necessarily local. They're off in some community somewhere. One thing I'll just point out, our own trash incinerator, it's right next to environmental justice communities identified by New York State. So here it is right off of 481, and this is about a half a mile. Whoops. And I'll just mention that to close here, Micron has contracted with a company called Veolia and several others to treat their hazardous waste. And the DEIS specifically mentions fuel blending and sending waste off to cement kilns. And facilities they identify are Veolia in Middlesex, New Jersey, Green America in Hannibal, Missouri, Systech in Fredonia, Kansas. And I haven't looked into all of these things, but I'm sure they're all in poor neighborhoods. I know for sure that Middlesex, New Jersey is in a poor neighborhood, northern New Jersey, and there's been a whole history of environmental violations at that facility. So I'm going to end there. This is the coalition I work with, Sustain CNY, and these are the member organizations.
Thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate your telling us how the Micron project could and will impact environmental justice communities. Now it's your chance, our audience, to, if you have any questions, you can